Greetings, beloved Princeton United Methodist Church community. It's Pastor Jenny here with another update for you, and I'm reading from Matthew chapter 5, verses 5 and 6. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. This is the word of life. Thanks be to God. So we are continuing our Lenten journey of forgiveness, this journey to release, be released, to release from cycles of sin and death, these things that bind us and hold us and keep us connected to the hurt and the pain that maybe we are ready to let go of, at least in part. I know that forgiveness is this very difficult journey, and as always, I want to remind you that we invite only what you are ready for. There is so much. I've said before that we as the church have not always done a good job of teaching about forgiveness, but I think one of the things that's so important is that it be about your readiness, not about when somebody else is ready for you to forgive. It needs to be something that we are ready for. But there have been lots of ways that the church has continued to share unhelpful things about forgiving. And I think one of the things that we tend to do as, not just in the church, this is true in the world as well, that we tend to think about forgiveness as something that is terribly weak, something that erases consequences for people, that subverts justice and prevents people from kind of feeling the pain that they have, or the consequences of the pain that they have inflicted. And I think it's really important to kind of dig in here, because I think that forgiveness is not that. I don't think that forgiveness is just about letting people off the hook, or it's not about just forgetting that something happened and thus perpetuating cycles of violence or abuse or hurt. It's not about that. It's got to be different than that. I think it's also, of course, obviously very different from kind of a tit for tat thing. That's also not forgiveness. So when biblically, we talk about like an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, this I hurt you, so you owe me what you took from me kind of a thing. Of course, there are parts of that are true and helpful, just as there are parts of the other that I just described that are true and helpful. But I really think that we find that true and helpful space in between, as a third way between these other two extremes, this tit for tat thing that keeps us in these cycles of violence, and this other end where there's not really any consequences, and so that too just kind of perpetuates cycles of violence. And when I say violence, I don't just mean physical violence, of course. I mean that there are lots of non-physical types of violence that we can perpetuate in our lives and in our communities, and we see this at a global level, these cycles of violence and retribution. We see it playing out on a global scale right now as there are countries at war with each other, Russia as invading the Ukraine, and that is just part of a bigger cycle of I don't mean just, it's terrible. It's part of a bigger cycle that is perpetuating pain and hurt and violence and retribution. And that is not what the way that Jesus invites us to. But even on a smaller scale in our personal lives, we can see how, I feel hurt and I feel like my humanity has been stripped away by somebody else, but then I do the same thing back. I say, well, if you're going to hurt me this way, then I'm going to hurt you in this way. And this kind of just keeps going and going and going. But the way that Jesus invites us into is a way of meekness, but weakness is not weakness. It's very difficult. These are hard things. Jesus invites us into a gentleness that isn't weakness. It's the same kind of vulnerability that Jesus shows on the cross, where he also forgives people. And Jesus, every time Jesus forgives, it is out of a place of strength and freedom. And so it calls us, this Jesus way, this third way, this way of forgiveness is quite difficult because it's not always a really clear map. It has a map, it has a guidance to it, but there's a whole lot more that we have to kind of work at to do the work of telling the story and naming the hurt and deciding how and when we are ready to forgive, and then what relationship we want to have or not have with the person or people who have hurt us. It's not just a cookie cutter thing that moves forward, and it's very personal. It takes a lot of discernment, and it's also what we invite you to. So this week, as we are thinking about forgiveness, as we're thinking about the meek and the hunger and thirst for righteousness, I invite you to listen deeply to what you are aware of when you are thinking about forgiving somebody that's hurt you. Again, I'm not asking you to go any further than you are ready to go. But where does it stir up in you those voices that say, oh, this is weak? If you forgive this, that's weakness. If you forgive this, that's not okay. It's letting them off free. It's not letting somebody feel the consequences. I invite you to just listen to those voices that come up for you and pay attention to them because they're important. They're part of that hunger and thirst for righteousness. So I'm not asking you to get rid of those voices. I want you to hear those voices and be in dialogue with those voices, and then also be in dialogue with the Jesus who invites us along this other way. And it's not that Jesus stomps those other things out. Jesus continues to invite us, I think, to wrestle and to struggle and to find this other kingdom way where gentleness and is part of it, vulnerability is part of it, but it's also not a weak vulnerability. I know that's oxymoronic, but it's not a weak vulnerability. It's a vulnerability that comes out of a groundedness, a certainty of who we are, that we are God's beloved. It's a vulnerability that comes from our own place of strength and freedom. Just as Jesus's forgiveness was rooted in that strength and freedom that he found in his relationship with God and in his certainty of the belovedness of all humans. So this is, again, tricky stuff. And so I just invite you to wrestle, to allow the wrestling to happen and to see where it leads you. I invite you to Tuesday midday worship at noon today. Our pastoral intern, Alex Hoshino, will be leading. He's actually going to be talking about our scripture from this past Sunday and inviting us a little more into our understanding of forgiveness. And that you can come in person to that noon service, or you can join by live stream, just like you do Sunday worship. You can join us for that. There's a Zoom conversation or an in-person conversation that will happen after that, and so you're welcome to join in at 12:30 on that Zoom call, and let us continue to talk and wrestle together and encourage one another in this really challenging and really, really important work. We're also including with this email today an email from a letter we got from Bishop John Scholl, who is our bishop, and it's talking about more of the things happening at the denominational level of the church. You have been hearing, if you've been part of the United Methodist Church for a while, you've been hearing some of the things. We know that General Conference was delayed. I got news about that last week, and that there are other things that are kind of coming as a result of that, and we want you to know about it. So you can read about that in the letter. If you have questions, please ask. I don't know how to anticipate all of your questions, and I may not even know the answers to your questions, but I will try to find out. If you have questions, please let me know, and I will do what I can to answer. But please see that email, and I think that's what I have for you today. I invite you to continue reading through this book. If you have it, I find it to just be really, really helpful. Continue to invite you into the daily practices here. These are all there with the intention of giving you continued guidance on this challenging and beautiful and much needed journey of forgiveness. Blessings to you all. It is always a gift to be on this journey with you. Remember that you are enough because God is enough. Thanks be to God for that.